So hello, everybody, and welcome to Debra and Peter are doing a podcast with me, Deborah Alcott-Tyler, and him, Peter Wanless. How have you been, Peter? What have you been up to since last week?
Deborah, yeah, I'm good, thanks. It's quite a quiet week work-wise from my point of view. I planted some potatoes this morning. How about that? I didn't think that was something I'd ever be doing, and I've got my onions to do as well. There's still a lot of duck action at each end of the house. The female ducks are much sought after by the males. It's quite romantic in the sense that they wander around in pairs. She's never, the two females are never alone. They're always subject to a lot of attention. But last night, all the males had gone somewhere else. I don't know quite where. Maybe they'd all gone off to a conference or something. But she was on her own and she squawked for about an hour. Normally I've felt that the female ducks have it good because they've got all this attention and being followed around all the time. But yeah, she felt lonely yesterday. I felt a bit sorry for her. But this morning they're all coupled up again and all is well.
Oh, okay, good. Although they it does make like parallel with women with unwanted attention from blokes.
There's definitely
probably squawking with joy, Peter, that you've been left alone for a few hours.
Possibly, yeah. You may be right. You may well be right. I hadn't thought of it like that. There you go.
Well,
how about you?
Well, it's been super busy my weeks. I won't take you through every single thing I've been up to, but on Tuesday I attended the ACEVO, day one of the ACEVO conference. I attended online, and it was really good, actually. I wasn't able to go on Wednesday, but on Tuesday it's just really great to sort of pause and pay attention and listen to other people's stories and what they have to say. And, and it's sort of a way of reinvigorating you. So I always think it's a really good idea to go on events like that. And then I couldn't go on the second day because I was giving a closing keynote at a conference in Wimbledon. But what I will say was so impressive about this is that 6 CVSs from Southwest London, I can't remember all of them, Richmond, Kingston, Croydon, I forget the 6 major ones, they basically decided to collaborate. So they said, instead of us all running our own separate conferences, when we're basically going to cover the same material, why don't we come together and do one? And I was so impressed like that, because when you're under pressure as a charity, you'll know this, Peter, when you're under pressure for funding and for activity and things like that, it's easier to shrink and see everybody else as the enemy and competitors. Yeah. What they've done is exactly the opposite. They said, well, look, why don't we all come together and share the risk and share the cost? And, and I was just so impressed by that. I really was. I mean, it's a lovely audience, to be honest. I kept being asked at the end for selfies, which made me feel very peculiar. I've got to be honest. Yeah, although... Yeah. I tell you what was interesting, though. So I got lots of feedback, people saying, I didn't think I'd done that good of a job, but I went down well. But what was really funny was one of the, so everybody was saying brilliant, inspirational, etc. And there was this one chap who sort of said somewhat dryly, that was very entertaining, Deborah. And what was really interesting for me, I instantly received that like a put down. Like, okay. It was just entertaining. It wasn't anything, whatever. Anyway, so this was on my mind. I came back and spoke to my partner about it last night, Andy, and I said, I felt very put down. And Andy said, well, maybe try looking at it from a different point of view. Maybe he just has come from a background where he doesn't know how to pay a compliment. And maybe him saying this was very entertaining was actually him trying to find a way to acknowledge you. And it made me laugh, actually, because I think about my father, who's also very poor at giving compliments. What he'll do is say, well done. And you get a pat on the back. He won't say you presented brilliantly or that was, do you know what I mean? So, yeah. And I just thought, isn't it interesting how I immediately assumed bad intent? Yeah. When actually it could equally as well have been entirely genuinely a compliment and just his way of expressing his appreciation. So, and I just think that's always a useful thing to remember, that most of the time people aren't actively trying to piss us off.
It's a tricky one, isn't it, that entertaining? Because people want to be entertained on these occasions. But at the same time, I guess we've all been at things where, bit like people say about a Chinese meal, you kind of have it and in the moment it feels really good. And then you go back and you think, well, what was that
Yeah.
What was that all about? Did I learn anything?
Yeah.
But better to be entertained than not entertained.
Yeah, that's what my colleague Ben said this morning. That's very true. But anyway, it just got me reflecting on how we react to stuff. Anyhow,
Something that caught my eye from ACEVO, I mean, LinkedIn at the moment just seems to be full of people who are either at the ACEVO conference or at this Anthropy thing down at Eden. Did I ever tell you about my my performance at Eden with Tim Smith as the warm-up act for Razor Light? I feel like this is one of my stock stories, but Tim Smith, he has the same birthday as us as well, by the way.
Oh, does he?
We're all
Same year?
20. Yeah, no, he's a little bit older, I think.
Okay.
But we're all 25th of September, and I was down there because it was funded hugely by the lottery, and he challenged me to go up on stage with him and talk about why the lottery was really important. And we did this after the Maccabees had played and before Razorlight were on. And the people who were putting on the show, they said, I mean, Tim can do what he likes there. He founded the whole thing, for God's sake. But so he was determined that we were going to go on stage, and I don't think he thought I was going to step up to the mark and do it. And they said to us, you've got 45 seconds to a minute, and after that we can't guarantee your safety. So we went on in front of all these people are kind of baying for the rock band to come on, and each of us spoke for about 30 seconds about why this was a community-based project, and it was great to look out for one another, and the lottery was a really good thing. And then we dived off the stage.
Very fast, I imagine.
Yeah, but it's a great place to be. So there's a lot of people enjoying themselves down there, putting the world to rights at Anthropy. But something that caught my eye from ACEVO was my successor at the NSPCC, Chris Sherwood. He was on a panel, so you must have heard that. And he was reported as saying something about, if you can run a small charity, you can certainly run a big charity. And I thought, and that's gone down extremely well. And I guess it would do if I were addressing the ACEVO conference in front of lots and lots of people who are running small charities. I would probably say something complimentary about small charities as well. But I wondered what you thought about
what he said,
because I have been coached by you in the past about how to relate to large audiences of small charities. And there are more similarities in the leadership and the conundrums which we face than a lot of people realize. At the same time, I think they are significantly different roles. But someone from a small charity can definitely run a large charity. Discuss. What do you think?
Well, it's funny that you phrase it, because I distinctly remember, Peter, when you first started at the NSPCC, we had this conversation over lunch, and you said, I think that there are lots of similarities between the two. And I can't remember exactly the words you used, but you said something like, you didn't use the term spheres of influence, but you said that as the chief executive of any size of charity, really you can only influence the people directly who report to you, because they have to do the messaging throughout the organisation. So if you can get your senior team strong and in carrying out the right cultures and values, they go down. And though you can be seen as a figurehead for the wider organisation, it's, your leadership really is, or sort of your practical leadership is restricted to that team. And of course, that's the same in a small charity. And I've never forgotten that. I thought that was a very useful point. I think I think it's a real scandal that if you've been the chief executive of a smaller charity, even if you've run a charity of £1 or £2 million, possibly £5 million, you have almost no hope whatsoever of ever being appointed as a chief executive of a big charity, because there's always this thing that says you've got to have big charity experience. I mean, you've got to get it for some, which is very often why quite a lot of people who work in big charities at senior director level often end up going on to be chief executive, because they can say they had a big charity experience, which by the way I think is great. I think it is good that people can get promoted into those posts, but I think people are missing a trick if they automatically assume that, because the other thing I remember you saying to me when we were talking about money, and I was comparing the size of DSC to the size of you, and you said it's just more noughts, Debra. The principles don't really change. And again, I just remember being really struck by that. So I think it's a pity that they're overlooked in that way. But I think the point Chris made about, you have resources in bigger charities that we simply don't in smaller ones. And yet we are dealing with a lot of the same issues. I mean, he talked about the politics and the, dealing with those sorts of issues as if that's restricted to big charities. The challenge you face in small charities is different, but it's not really. small charities still have to navigate the political landscape, usually local political landscape, but nonetheless, they still have to navigate clashing egos on boards and things like that. So I think those are very similar. I think what is easier for a small charity chief executive is it's easier to win over the whole team because there are fewer of them and you're more easily able to engage with them directly, and have them hear from you directly. So I think that's a big, big bonus. We joke, small charities, you have to, one minute you're writing a strategy paper, then you're having a conversation with a local councillor about possible pot of funding, then you're having a conversation with a stricken volunteer who's had an unfortunate experience with a service user, and then you're cleaning the loo and fixing the plumbing. It's like you do have to, which I just suspect you were not asked to do, Peter.
No, one of the first charity visits that I made as the chief executive of the Big Lottery Fund was to a little charity in Reading, and I was having a conversation with the chief exec. I think there were about 3 people that worked at the charity, and someone came rushing in, and they had to get a funding bid in that evening, and the printer had run out of ink. And he was the only one who could get down to Ryman's and buy the ink in order to fill the printer up, in order to complete the bid, so our meeting was cut short. And I said, that's absolutely fine, but that's the kind of, you've got to be able to roll your sleeves up, haven't you, and mug in and do what needs to be done. And I certainly think that what Chris is absolutely right about the entrepreneurship, the swift judgments about prioritization, the kind of focus on what really matters in relation to the cause, all those things. When you're in a small organization, you're just doing it relentlessly, aren't you? And that is different from we've got a problem with the IT department can have a think about that. We need to think about our pay scales. The HR department can think about that. But some of the worst leaders of large organizations, and this isn't just charities, you see this very often with politicians, don't you, are micromanagers who are excellent personal performers and they're brilliant at what they do, but they cannot or will not or don't understand the skill of delegation and empowerment and building people. So it's all very well having all this resource at your disposal, but if you don't know where the levers are, how to pull the levers, how to create teams that will learn from one another and create momentum, then that's where I think it's not immediately relatable running a small organization to running a large one. And that's probably what trustees are fearful of. If they've got a set of people and someone's been a middle manager who has had 40 or 50 people working to them, and someone is a chief executive who's had 2 or 3 working to them, who's more likely to be able to run the organization with 200 people, it shouldn't automatically be the person who happens to have managed lots of other people, because they may not be very capable at all. There's this thing called the Peter principle, isn't there, ironically, where everyone gets promoted to the level beyond their competence. And so if you're one of these kind of Peters who is succeeding on the back of other people's efforts and not actually adding value or contributing yourself, then you're the last sort of person that a big organization needs to succeed.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because you talk about the small organizations, but actually the smaller organizations I'm referring to are ones who employ perhaps 20, 30, 40, 50 staff.
Right.
It's like, but it's not even so much about the staff, it's usually about the size of the bank balance. It's not even, they think, well, have you run a 20 million pound organization or a 50 million pound or 100 million pounds? They often don't even speak about the staff. The numbers of staff is often about money, and there's just sort of something that you're you're going to be more competent. And I mean, I don't know, Peter. It comes down to, doesn't it? At the end of the day, we have some really outstandingly good big charity chief executives, and we have some really crap big charity chief executives, and we have exactly the same at every scale of charity going down.
Probably.
That's the reality, and I think that, I do think it's a pity that we can't get boards to think slightly differently about what they want in leadership, and to not restrict it all to it's got to be somebody who's run a massive charity in the past. But it was certainly what Chris said did go down very well with the audience, as you quite rightly say.
And I think smaller charities are feeling unloved at the moment a bit, aren't they? Because of some of the changes that are happening at NCVO and the rest of it. And these things go in waves as well. I mean, there have been moments when I've had conversations with the main infrastructure organisations in the charity sector and felt you do not know or understand or appreciate the nature of what we're trying to do as large organisations at all, because you've got this membership of lots and lots of smaller organisations who rightly have all sorts of issues and concerns and challenges. It's just they're not quite the same as ours at this moment in time. And there's a little bit of that led a number of us to do that work which Matt Hyde and Catherine Johnson led on the volunteering, which was that was just it was kind of kindred spirits of leaders of charities of a certain size just talking to one another, rather than being shoved into a sort of box with hundreds of other people whose priorities weren't quite the same. But very quickly that can become big charities talking to one another and small charities talking to one another, and some of the very best partnerships that you get are big and small coming together and
completely
sharing.
And we've got to stop thinking in terms of size. Because I hate that sort of small charities are better than big charities, and big charities are better than small ones. It's like we need all of them because they all have different roles and different skills to bring. But there is something. I've completely forgotten what I was going to say now. Big charities, little charities. I got distracted by my own head. My own thoughts disappeared off. This is what happens when you get older, isn't it? What the hell was I going to say? I can't remember. But actually, I did want to say something about, how hard it feels at the moment. Sorry, I've remembered. I was going to say that we've got to stop thinking in terms of big charities and little charities and think more in terms of common cause. And the reality is it doesn't matter if you're a small children's charity in Dulwich or, the NSPCC. The reality is you care about the same things, and there are ways in which both can come together behind common cause. And I'd love to see a bit more of that. But I think that small charities often feel intimidated and possibly bullied by bigger charities, and also jealous. There's definitely an element of jealousy when a charity's got a bit more money and resources than you do. And I think often, often is that unfair? I think sometimes larger charities tend to sort of look down a bit on the smaller charities as thinking they're not sophisticated enough. And I think we've got to move beyond that. I mean, not in every case. There are quite some really outstandingly good big charity chief executives who really do honour and work alongside smaller charities. But I think we need more of it because it's the cause that matters. It's not the size of your bloody turnover in reserves. It's about a child or a dog or a canal, or a camel. It's about that matters.
And Bernardo's led some great work through COVID, building huge coalitions of organisations in places that shared a kind of common need to do something and made a real virtue of that. And the whole dynamic was different from the one which so many of those charities had previously been, encouraged to play, which was to compete for one another for contracts. And that really does set big up against small, because small are going to think, well, we're never going to have the resources to compete against these people. And whoever wins, more than one other charity loses. And that makes it really hard to come together, doesn't it? So.
It does. Yeah, absolutely does. But there are ways in which, if 6 CVSs in southwest London can come together, we all can. But, interesting talking about this as well is that because the one thing that does unite all of us in our sector, pretty much all of us, is the fact that our job is to be purveyors of hope. That, that our job is to and hope in the sense that there is a possible future. And that if you lose hope, that future never becomes possible. Whereas if you stay in hope, it does become possible. And you're saying about, how we've sort of, certainly smaller charities have given up hope a bit themselves, and sort of doom and gloom loop of the funding's really difficult, the need is going up. All these things are absolutely true, and they're all knackered, and when I go into a room with 150 odd people and I see bags under the eyes, and I point it out as well, of course. I can tell you're all tired of the state of you, But actually, we've gotten into this sort of talking ourselves down and talking ourselves, because it's one of the things I hate most of all is when people say there isn't any money and we just accept it, because it's bullshit. There is money. There's loads of money. We're still a £3.2 trillion economy, for God's sake. We're still the 6th largest economy in the world out of 200 odd economies. There is money. It's just a question of where that money is being chosen to be spent. And I think what happens is we hear this mantra that says there's no money, we're all broke, the country's broke. And so people give up, and I was saying yesterday that, if you have a person who one of your service users or beneficiaries or clients comes to you and says, I've given up, there's no hope, there's no point, I don't see any future for me, it's like there isn't any point me doing anything, getting out of bed in the morning. We wouldn't say, you're right, love. There is no hope, give up now. We just wouldn't say it to them. And yet we say it to ourselves. There's no point applying for that grant. There's no point speaking to that local council. There's no point, arguing for more money. And what we're doing is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I just want to say to people, I know it feels shit at the moment and it feels shit for most of us, but actually that's when we have to hang on to that hope and purvey it, get that message out there, even more importantly, when it does feel as dark and deep as it is.
You sent something to me earlier this week. I don't know if this was another person you'd heard at ACEVO or somewhere else, which provoked a bit of a kind of WhatsApp chat between the two of us about visible leadership and invisible leadership. And it got me thinking that there is and has been quite a vogue, for understandable reasons, of the humble, selfless leader, the quiet introvert who puts their cause up front and themselves to the back, and everything is articulated in relation to what we're seeking to achieve rather than the cult of personality. And there's lots to like about all of this. If I think back to my time in education, we used to have these superheads who would come in and rescue failing schools and that kind of thing. And actually what they were doing was kind of coming in, shaking everything up and then leaving before anyone noticed that it had all gone wrong, a bit like some of the worst football managers. So there's definitely a place for humility and selflessness, and in communications increasingly, towards to the end of my time at the NSPCC, having volunteer childline counsellors talking about the difference that they were making, rather than the chief executive of the organisation saying, we've got some volunteer counsellors who are doing good work. People trust in and appreciate, I think, the real lives and the real individuals that are going on. But if the leader becomes so selfless and quiet that they're lost to this debate and aren't out there articulating the hope and the ambition and the challenge, then who's going to do it? And we've moaned on here before about there not being enough charity leaders on Question Time and some of the big TV programs and all of that. And maybe we have gone a bit too far as a sector in being so selfless that we're not banging the table and creating sufficient attention for ourselves. I mean, people say donors back people, they don't back causes.
Well, I don't know, possibly a bit of both, but it's interesting. I kind of get really annoyed with any statements about how leaders ought to be, because it's like, piss off. We're all different. We all have our own different styles, and people's perception is, if you're, somebody in the face, if you're so me, for example, I speak a lot, I'm out a lot, I'm very, very visible. I'm visible internally in the organisation as well as externally. And the temptation is for people to say, well, she's all about her. It's all about her personal brand, her personal ego. And, she's invincible, without ever actually knowing what's going on inside my head, what my motivations are, what I'm trying to do. I remember years ago being on this joint program, and with a coach, and one of my colleagues in the thing said, Debra, you take up all the space. You really need to shut up more, because all we ever hear is from you, and, you need to step back and let others have a go. And I can remember being absolutely devastated, because I never saw myself as taking up all the space. I just was enthusiastic, and I wanted to join in, and I wanted to, make the thing work. And so that was my style, or my way of being as a human being. Anyway, I always remember the coach speaking to me afterwards, because he'd see I was in some distress. And when the thing ended, he took me aside, went for a little walk around the building, and he said, what's happened? And I said how hurt I'd been by this remark. And he said to me, other people don't shine if you dim your own light. He said, don't change. He said, because you give by stepping up and speaking out, you're giving other people the permission and the opportunity to do the same. So it's not your job to get out of the way so other people can shine. And I've always remembered that. I think it's more nuanced than that, of course, because of course you have to get out of the way so other people can shine, but not because your personality is wrong, because that's part of the job. So I hope that I do that at DSC. I hope that I push people forward and they get to, for example, I very rarely ever present at a board meeting. Most of the presentations that happen at our board meetings about our work are done by our staff, not even by our directors necessarily, because we want to give people the opportunity to shine. So I think it's also when you read this stuff about introvert extroverts, like introverts, don't you realize how wonderful we are? You extroverts are awful. And I'm like, well, also don't confuse extroversion. So I'm very gregarious. I brought up in a family where I was forced to be like massive Anglo-Indian Catholic family with hundreds of bloody cousins, aunts and uncles all over the place, as well as, fighting with my own siblings to get airtime attention. And so I come from that sort of background, but that doesn't mean that I'm super extroverted. It's just this is how I've learned how to behave.
Yes.
In fact, people would be surprised to know that when I'll do a 4-hour drive in my car in silence with no music, nothing, just quietly driving. That my favourite thing is being on my own. I absolutely loathe parties, and you and I said, I hate networking, but you do it because it's part of what's required of you as the role. So anyway, so these were some of the messy thoughts that were gurgling around in my head when I thought about the business of silent leadership. I don't know. I think what you do, the job of the leader is in our sector is to achieve the core purpose of the charity. That's it.
Yes.
And you have a number of mechanisms to do that. You have your staff, you have your trustees, you have your volunteers, and you have yourself. And part of what you have to do is to be visible, I think, as a leader, both internally and externally. But there are many who would disagree.
And certainly all the roles that I have had have required engagement and involvement of people well beyond the organization's own balance sheet. And so constantly one is thinking about how do we amplify the understanding and impact and influence of what we are doing, so you can quietly go about and do things rather competently and make the numbers add up and feel good about yourselves and one another. But actually there's an opportunity to engage and involve and inspire way beyond what you do yourself, and that does require conscious thought about campaigning and visibility. And I think I kind of answered my own question a bit earlier about it's not about ego, it's about outcome, isn't it? And so if the outcome is better served by the frontline childline volunteers describing what they're doing, then give them the spotlight and the opportunity. But if it's a parliamentary select committee where you're going to be torn to shreds by some very clever, difficult questioning that's designed for the cameras, then the chief executive needs to step forward and be highly visible in those circumstances, because they have the accountability and the responsibility, and it's not fair on the volunteers to be put into that sort of a situation. So maybe it comes back to style and
well, it's horses for courses. I always talk about leadership style as being about, you wouldn't wear a bikini to a funeral and you wouldn't wear a suit to the beach. Basically, I think really clever leaders adapt their style to the circumstances in which they're in. And I think very often, when we're being judged by others who aren't within our own organizations because they see us on a public platform somewhere, or so they confuse our volubility or our delivering of a speech with how we lead our organizations. And so I whereas what we choose to do things differently. I mean, I have one of the people who reports to me when we have a one-to-one, he likes a lot of time. He wants to talk, he wants to explore things, he really needs the time. Whereas one of my others is like, it likes it short, sharp, to the point. This is what's going on. This is what I need. This is what's happening. And so I adapt to that. So that's what he needs compared to what the other one needs. And I think that's the skill in leadership. It's not saying, here I am, take me as I am, this is me. It's about saying, well, there is a me, but the me needs to be responsive to the people that I'm serving, the people I'm looking after. I mean, it's the same with parenting, isn't it? Or like if you're dealing with a child, if you're dealing with a toddler who's like, fallen over and is really upset, you'd go down to their level, you'd soften your voice, you'd be comforting. If you're facing a teenager who pushed that toddler over, you'd be likely to stand up and be a little bit more firm and a little bit more outspoken. You adapt your behaviour to the circumstances as they require. That, for me, is the skill in leadership, I think.
Yeah, no, that all makes good sense. Well, we are getting very close now to the start of the cricket season.
We are indeed.
And tomorrow is Somerset's first pre-season friendly down the road. So I should be organising my flexible working to accommodate that. It's a pre-season friendly against Glamorgan.
Oh, okay.
So it's not a kind of proper game, but they'll be out on the pitch in their whites, and it'll look like a cricket match. And it's free for anyone in and around Taunton. Come and see us, and then the season starts proper the following Friday. So yeah, all sorts of kind of inspirational speeches and expectations, and anything is possible at this stage of the season.
Actually, at some point we must talk about leadership in relation to captains in cricket, and how often we see exceptional batters being appointed captains and then their batting averages dramatically plummet, or exceptional bowlers being appointed captains and aren't able to knock over a feather, never mind the wicket of an opposing batsman. I think that would be a great conversation, but not for now, Peter, because we have to go.
We have to go. All right, great. Thanks very much. It's good to see you.
And you
enjoy
too.
The weekend. We're a little bit late this week. And see everyone again soon.
Bye.
Bye.